Welcome to this WION special broadcast. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. On June 16 this year, the Royal Bhutan Army noticed Chinese soldiers in the Doklam area armed with bulldozers and excavators building a high mountain road. The Indian Army swung into action by sending its troops to the region to evict the Chinese soldiers. This incident set off a series of heated exchanges at various levels. In the midst of a war of words, diplomatic channels swung into action. Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval was in Beijing to attend the BRICS NSA's meeting, but the Doklam standoff was high on the agenda. He met with the Chinese counterparts and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. On the WION special tonight, we take you through the entire issue. What is the standoff about? Why this aggressive posturing from China? And more importantly, should India be worried? What exactly is China's case here? Here's a report.
It may appear like a schoolboy scuffle, but this is very serious. This undated video is about an attempt by Chinese troops to enter Indian territory and claim it as their own. The fact that none of the troops are armed does not lessen the gravity of the incident. The fact is, incidents of this kind have happened in the past, notably in 2008, when Chinese troops destroyed some makeshift Indian army bunkers.
I think China felt it was strong enough, that the time was opportune for it to push for capturing or taking over Doklam. Bhutan is due for its elections next year, and I think that would be a factor because Bhutan has been resisting establishing full diplomatic relations with China, and the Chinese have been trying to create a pro-China lobby inside Bhutan, and now with this pressure they may have thought that that would help. In any case, I don't think, in fact it's quite clear that they did not expect India to take such a firm stand. They did not expect such a swift and robust response from us.
The latest incident is curious since the Chinese border in Sikkim, which is a little over 200 kilometers long, has remained largely quiet. The Chinese claim Indian troops crossed over in the Dola area, which is at the southern tip of the strategic Chumbi Valley at the tri-junction of India, China and Bhutan. The Chinese say India obstructed normal activities on Chinese territory. They accused India of provocative behavior and threatened countermeasures. The Chinese then suspended the Mansarovar Yatra, claiming damage to the highway.
What I would like to emphasize here is that official Indian pilgrims need necessary atmosphere and condition to make their trip, and that the Indian side is held responsible for the fact that these pilgrims could not cross the Nathula Pass to China's Tibet. It depends on whether the Indian side could right their wrongs in good time.
India has refused to comment, but other sources confirm that the Chinese tried to cross over into India and there was a scuffle with Indian troops. A flag meeting was also held on June 20th, but tensions remain. Bureau Report, WION.
Inevitably, there have been claims and counterclaims between New Delhi and Beijing. While China is crying wolf about India's aggressive behavior, India has taken a firm stand on the issue.
Of the United States and the Prime Minister of the Republic of India.
The Modi-Trump bonhomie on show in Washington, D.C. may have triggered it. But India and China are again locking horns over an incident that also concerns the Indian state of Sikkim, which shares a border with China, and also the Kingdom of Bhutan. In public, India's defense minister was hopeful that matters would soon settle down.
मुझे लगता है कि अनसेटल्ड बॉर्डर के ये कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस हैं और पहले भी ऐसी घटनाएं होती रही हैं और इस तरह की skirmish होती हैं, वहाँ गोली तो नहीं चलती लेकिन स्टैंड ऑफ्स होते हैं और फिर धीरे धीरे कुछ समय बाद स्टैंड ऑफ समाप्त होते हैं. मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि ये स्टैंड ऑफ भी समाप्त होगा.
Indian Army Chief General Bipin Rawat lost no time in visiting Sikkim and made a clear statement of intent. Between the Indian state of Sikkim and the Kingdom of Bhutan lies the Chumbi Valley. The valley is in Tibet, which is part of China. China has been building a road in the valley which is cutting through Bhutanese territory in the Doklam Plateau. Indian troops are present in the area as a part of a contingent to train the Bhutanese army. The Chinese claim Indian troops entered their territory. They claimed some of their personnel engaged in road building were assaulted by the Indians. But Bhutan has objected to the road construction and issued a démarche to the Chinese. The démarche said, quote, "We have issued a démarche to China through its diplomatic mission here. Recently, the Chinese Army, People's Liberation Army, started construction of a road towards Bhutanese army camp at Samphiri in Doklam area, which is in violation of an agreement between the two countries."
As per an understanding which was reached between India and China in 2012, any area which is forming a tri-junction, if there is any alteration to be done or any decision to be taken in that area, it was to be with the concurrence of all the three countries involved. This is not followed in this case. So that would have altered the status quo in that particular area. So India, I think, did the right thing by doing this, because after the event has happened, you couldn't have done anything about it. So the best way would have been to stop it before it started. So that is what India has done. And India didn't want to allow the status quo to be altered along with Bhutan. That's fine. That's the correct way to do it.
The Bhutan said the territory has been in dispute, although on the map it is marked as Bhutanese territory. Bhutan said, pending a settlement, Bhutan and China had agreed to maintain peace. But it appears the Chinese have been cutting corners in their desire to ensure strategic supremacy in this area. In the Chumbi Valley, apart from the road, they have also been making preparations for laying a railway line, running all the way from Gyanse to Yadong in the Chumbi Valley, and also the Nathu La Pass in Sikkim. This brings Chinese troops within 50 kilometers of the Chicken's Neck, that narrow corridor linking Bengal with Assam and other states in the northeast. If China cuts this corridor, then eastern India is lost. Bureau Report, WION.
So why is the Doklam Plateau so significant for both the countries? Clearly, this is the first such confrontation in many, many years. Here's a story on the strategic importance of this region.
The Doklam Plateau in western Bhutan measures about 270 square kilometers. But it is claimed by China. In fact, China's attempt at road building here is what precipitated the current crisis. China needs the road to run through the Doklam Plateau for ease of military movement. Here is why India intervened. India intervened to stop the Chinese road building after a Bhutanese attempt failed. A 2007 treaty commits the two to consult and cooperate to safeguard their national interests. India is training the Bhutanese army and has a brigade stationed in a place called Ha in Bhutan. India has moved 3,000 troops to the disputed location, and so did China. As diplomatic parleys continue, experts and analysts say both sides have major stakes in the current standoff. Here is what is at stake for China. President Xi Jinping hopes to cement his power at the National People's Congress in October. He therefore cannot afford to climb down or show any sign of weakness. His rivals in the Chinese political system will be looking for any chink in his armor to bring him down. President Xi must also not lose face with the Chinese military. But the stakes are equally high for India. Narendra Modi has opted for a tough stand. He will not waver in the defense of close ally Bhutan. India will also stand by agreements it has committed to. Bureau Report, WION.
India and China have clashed several times, but New Delhi has remained largely silent on the back foot as far as the powerful nuclear neighbor China is concerned. Here's a timeline of the India-China conflicts.
Their relationship goes back at least 2,000 years and revolved mostly around trade. But the first clash between India and China came in the 18th century over Tibet and Ladakh. However, and since both sides were preoccupied by other conflicts, they backed off. By the early 50s, both India and China were modern nations. India had just shaken off British rule, while the People's Republic of China was born on the other side of the Himalayas. But the first seed of discontent was sown by the Tibet question. There was disagreement over Aksai Chin, and then, when the Dalai Lama received refuge in India, the Chinese saw it as plain interference. In 1962, the cauldron of mutual discontent boiled over. A short border war erupted. India was defeated and pushed back to within 48 kilometers of the Assam plains in the northeast. China occupied portions of Ladakh. The war sent relations between the two countries into the deepest freeze they had ever known. It was the quiet mountain pass of Nathula in Sikkim that was to be the next flashpoint. In '67, Chinese troops opened fire at Indian soldiers stationed there. 62 Indian troops lost their lives. The fire wasn't out yet. Just days later, the two sides used machine guns upon each other at Chola, another outpost in Sikkim. 88 Indians and 300 Chinese troops lost their lives. By the early 70s, what had begun as border wars had turned into political maneuvers. Flashpoints remain to date, with the Chinese now beginning to change positions as and when political developments prompt them to. India's military protection of Bhutan was not high on China's list of resentments till the emergence of new political alliances. India's engagement with the United States and Japan is growing. New Delhi has been vocal on Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea. No surprises then that China now has its eye on a hitherto undisputed part of Bhutan. The dragon's breathing fire again, but this time the elephant is not crouching. Padma Rao, WION.
As the standoff showed no signs of winding down anytime soon, the Chinese media jumped in to queer the pitch. The comments, while acknowledging India's growing stature, also held out a subtle warning. Here's a story on how the media in China overreacted on Doklam.
While the People's Daily, which is the official mouthpiece of the Chinese government, has chosen to stick to the official statements issued by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the more populist Global Times, in an almost jingoistic tenor, has gone ballistic against India on the recent standoff in Sikkim. An op-ed piece headlined, "Indian Troops' Provocation Brings Disgrace to Themselves," appearing in the Global Times, blames India's enhanced sense of strategic superiority on its growing economic might. A paragraph in the op-ed piece reads, and I quote, "India's national confidence has been greatly boosted with its GDP rising to 5th in the world. The fact that the US and West are willing to woo India to counterbalance China has particularly added to India's sense of strategic superiority," unquote. The tone and tenor of the op-ed piece then acquires a shrill pitch. China avoids making an issue of border disputes, which has indulged India's unruly provocations. This time, the Indian side needs to be taught the rules. The piece reads,
If we look at the kind of statements, threats and warnings that the Global Times has been issuing, I have not seen them in the past 40 years that I've been monitoring China. This kind of statement, literally that they're going to dismember India, they're going to revive the insurgency, they're going to send troops to Kashmir. These are not statements that an ordinary Indian is going to forget in a hurry. Certainly, the policy planners are not going to forget it. It's going to stay in their mind. And when they look at what China is planning, doing or saying, this will be a constant factor which they will have to take into account. So I think they have done a lot of damage to the relationship.
It claims that India cannot afford a showdown with China on border issues, that it lags behind China in terms of national strength, and also claimed that the so-called strategic support from the US is superficial. It said China has no desire to confront India and that maintaining friendly ties with New Delhi is Beijing's basic policy. Bureau Report, WION.
China's frequent incursions along the 3,600-kilometer-long border to India are well known. But what are its issues with at least 18 other countries? Even with those, it shares no land boundaries with. Here's more.
Walls don't hinder it, nor do fences, nor do the deepest oceans. Agreements are frequently disputed or reinterpreted with poetic freedom. Asian superpower China is facing off with both ethnically related neighbors and others. The dragon has been breathing fire and locking horns with at least 18 countries across Asia, including its other mighty Asian challengers, Japan and India. To Japan, Beijing says that the Senkaku Islands and sometimes the Ryukyu archipelago are China's sovereign territory. It cites the ancient Ming dynasty to demand parts of Vietnam and Cambodia. Historical events of the late 1800s come in handy when China wants parts of Nepal and Bhutan. Indeed, a convenient explanation for all Chinese claims in the former Himalayan kingdoms that they belong to Tibet. The Yuan dynasty springs to Beijing's mind when it turns its territorial gaze upon North Korea's Baekdu Mountain, and sometimes Beijing's radar lays claim on all of North Korea, Taiwan, but also significant tracts of Laos. And the fact that Brunei is one of the richest kingdoms in the world is no great impediment. Beijing believes and occupies several islands of the Spratly Atoll. Central Asia absorbs China's ambition too. It sees parts of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan as its own. Why the dispute? Blame it on Russia. As for Mongolia, all of which it sees as its own land. Well, lay it squarely on Genghis Khan. What's brewing on China's immediate western borders and beyond? Plenty. Afghanistan's Badakhshan is coveted by Beijing. China illegally occupies thousands of kilometers of Aksai Chin in India's state of Jammu and Kashmir. To the naked Chinese eye, Arunachal Pradesh is the southern part of Tibet. That the Arunachalis insist they are Indian is hardly important. Finally, China squats on more than 5,000 kilometers of Indian territory in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. And what about Pakistan? Few surprises that it is one of the few South Asian countries upon which China lays no territorial claims. After all, it pays to be a paid protectorate of the mighty People's Republic of China. Bureau Report, WION.
For years now, China has laid claims to territories belonging to other countries, be it in India, Japan or Taiwan. There is a massive build-up of troops and threatening noises of war that the China's PLA on Bhutan's Doklam Plateau has been making, which Bhutan had requested the Indian army to guard. Western nations always cite democracy, freedom of expression and the protection of sovereign territory and human rights. They have railed against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, subsequent Iranian regimes and Turkey's President Erdogan. And yet, what is the world doing and saying about China's invasion of Doklam? Not a lot. We at WION are not surprised. Here's why.
The US is the world's largest economy. China is the second largest. The US-China relationship is the century's most important, say analysts. Two-way trade between the countries stands at US dollars 578.6 billion. The US exports 115.8 billion to China, and the other way around, the figure stands at 462.8 billion. The United States on the Doklam invasion, it expressed concern. China is the EU's second largest trading partner. The EU exports to China a total of 314.4 billion euro. EU FDI into China stands at 7.1 billion. China exports to the European Union 308.4 billion euro. Chinese investment in the EU 0.7 billion. And what does the EU say on the Doklam invasion? That China's road builders were caught unawares. China is Nepal's top donor. Nepal policy is one of equidistance from India and China. China's FDI into Nepal, US dollars 3.48 billion, and it promises a further 13.52 billion. Nepal on the Doklam invasion, silence. With US dollars 15 billion, China is the largest investor in Sri Lanka. The island nation is part of China's maritime Silk Route. A sixth of Lanka's external debt is towards China. But what does Sri Lanka say on the Doklam invasion? Zilch. Pakistan and China. Need WION say anything? Padma Rao, WION.
The big question for India, just how real is the Chinese threat? When the Chinese entered the region to build a road cutting right through Bhutan's sovereign territory, the Indian army moved in. The road would only strengthen China's long-standing claim on the Doklam Plateau. The Chinese border guard and the Indian army are facing off. The warnings for serious repercussions have been growing louder. But how real is the threat? Or is it merely the sound of rattling Chinese sabers? Here's a look.
High up on India's eastern border is the Doklam Plateau, an 89 square kilometer patch of fertile grazing land used by both Chinese and Bhutanese shepherds. China has for long claimed Doklam. A Bhutan-India treaty, though, promises India's help to guard Bhutan's borders. In any case, there is long-standing disagreement between India and Bhutan on the one side and China on the other on the three-way demarcation of the area. By sending in a battery of construction equipment and workers to cut a road from Tibet to the Chumbi Valley, both contested areas which the Chinese claim it will be a cakewalk for the PLA to mobilize troops and encircle India's northeast. India particularly fears that a Chinese annexation of Doklam will give it strategic advantage and a bird's-eye view of India's heavily militarized Siliguri corridor, 23-kilometer-long crucial chicken neck that is India's connection to its northeastern states and is hardly 80 kilometers away from the disputed tri-junctional border.
The question of threat to the Siliguri corridor, or the chicken's neck as we call it, has been overblown in my view. It is not such a dire threat that it has been made out to be, because if China tries to come into the chicken's neck, it will get trapped because its logistics lines are much longer. Even in Doklam plateau, their supply lines today are nearly 200 kilometers or so. So they will face a problem if this gets prolonged in the winters. So I think what India has done is the best thing possible, and this is the only way one can really, stand up to China, and that is what India has demonstrated.
There are several reasons why India's fears may be unfounded. India has massive troop presence in the area and has been increasing it rapidly. China, on its part, has only its border guards along the disputed tri-border. For the PLA to get to Siliguri, China would first have to mobilize units stationed in Tibet or elsewhere in mainland China first. Any such freshly mobilized troops would need weeks to acclimatize to Tibet's altitude first, giving India plenty of time to fortify its own units already in Sikkim. And there is hardly a way that the PLA could sneak into Siliguri without expecting an all-out and sustained assault from the Indian armed forces first. India has not been sleeping on the job. There are 40,000 additional troops, with a fresh mountain strike force of 60,000 men under training. 2 new brigades have been positioned along the line of actual control. And as far as the line of actual control is concerned, Indian army presence is already much stronger than that of China. So for all its posturing, China's shrill threats can best be described by proverbs, empty vessels or rattling sabers. Take your pick. Padma Rao, WION.
And so, amidst the trading of charges, the toughening of stands and rhetoric, there has been a renewed diplomatic activity between the two countries, with India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval visiting China as part of the BRICS NSA's meet. A thaw now looks likely and will help Indo-China ties get back on track. That's it for now. Thanks very much for watching.